Hello again, everyone, to another weekly devlog. We missed last week due to day job stuff keeping me busy, but I'm really glad to see that folks enjoyed the previous video. You all gave me good feedback on it. I hope the audio mix is better this time. If not, please let me know. We'll keep iterating based on feedback. So this week, I know last week, last video, I wanted to focus on class design. Well, I've been working on implementing the various skills and things. It's taking a while, and at least gameplay-wise, there isn't much of a difference right now. But I did want to show a bit of the sort of design planning for that, we'll do these kinds of design overviews like every 4 weeks or so, as a treat. But yeah, we'll be back to gameplay footage and voiceover next week, hopefully. Okay, so yeah, with that, let's talk about. So, when talking about class design, we need to talk about the characters first. So, how are we representing characters in Gatecrashers? Well, they're going to be player generated. It's a first-person dungeon RPG, so they're not physically in the world. So we represent them via portrait. We want to leave an option that players can load in their own custom portraits, right? And it works. I'm using these portraits from a asset pack, and I think these are for like the Lancer TTRPG. I really like them. I think they have a lot of character. It's the kind of like retro kind of sci-fi like look that I really enjoy, and I think won't represented in like the final visual version of Gatecrashers. So yeah, we'll be using these for now. So initial stats, we want to randomize them very slightly, but mostly the stat growth is determined by your class. Every level you get skill points, right, that you can invest in active and passive skills. Most actives and passives have like 3 levels of investment. So you can obviously dip, right, in order to get the benefit, but you got to commit in order to get the most out of it. And you can get these primarily via level ups, but certain events can give them to you too, like story events and things like that. And then lastly, this is a consumable which you'll be able to find in different parts of the dungeons, and eventually be able to manufacture it yourself for very high costs, right? So it is theoretically possible to sort of max out all the skills, but like it requires a ton of investment to do so. So it wouldn't be a sci-fi RPG if we didn't talk about aliens, right? So that's actually one of the big determinations, is that like, do we have alien characters or not? I think we do, and I think, but I do think that we kind of keep them humanoid for my sanity's sake. There will obviously be cooler alien archetypes that we can introduce in other places, and there'll also be members of your party. But one of the things that we want to do is that we don't really want like racial skills and all that, right? Like from fantasy RPGs. I think that's kind of gauche at this point. So instead, what I kind of wanted to do is have it such that the portraits you can have, right, are humanoid aliens, right, of different varieties. But in the game, there's a way to push them along these 3 axes of organic, synthetic, and etheric, where humanoid is sort of like it's like one point in each axis, right? And then you can like shift them a little bit further in one way or the other. And this sort of changes, right, like their kind of base like body type, right? So for example, if you push towards synthetic from regular humanoid, you become a cyborg, and if you push again, you become more of like a full body robot, right? And so that is sort of another way of progression that can happen. Maybe it's like a surgery kind of thing. I do know that I want it to be reversible. So yeah, maybe get into like an alien polymorpher, right, and then it sort of shifts you around. The only one that really needs explanation here is probably etheric, and that is becoming sort of an energy ghost kind of a thing, right? There's a class of enemies that are like that. So part of the reason that we're doing it like this is that the enemy types are represented around these sort of broad lines, and also the fact that you can run to like organic synthetic or synthetic etheric or etheric organic, right? Like types of enemies, and that changes what tools you use to deal with them. And then each character is represented by a number of gear slots, and these increase as they advance up the class tiers. So we have O slots, which are offense slots, so you put your weapons there. D slots, your armor and shields go there. And S slots, these are like various mods and accessories that can either give you unique passives or bump your stats up in like a particular specialization. And so we actually want to start relatively small with this. So in the demo that I'm building, you actually start off with one O slot and one D slot, and then when you get your first class, that's when it expands a little bit. And so the goal there is that with the slot system is that you can have items that can be worth multiple slots because of some kind of benefit that they're bringing. So light weapons, for instance, only take up one slot, but heavy weapons may take up two. And so maybe there's a choice initially between 2 light weapons or 1 heavy weapon, but once you get the third slot, you have 3 light weapons. You could be like triple wielding. Or like a heavy weapon and a light weapon, or like a super heavy weapon that is like all 3 slots. So that's the kind of space that we want to expand in, and it also makes it such that there's a big power jump every time you hit a class tier, and the enemies will sort of be scaled to kind of match that, right? So like if you're kind of like if you don't really want to like push the character to the next tier, right? Like the game's gonna be a little bit more demanding of you in order to make that promotion happen. There is scope for something similar to, I'm going to bring up the game False Skies, because the class stuff I'm sort of drawing from that, but also like responding to it in like different ways. False Skies, by the way, great game. Please check it out, support the developer. I think they do good work. Yeah, so they have more of a Pokemon system where sort of each class can be leveled up all the way, and you essentially choose when to move up tiers. Here, like, there's a hard limit on like when you're kind of like, hey, this is the maximum level you can achieve before promoting to the next tier, and then any XP that you have is going to be banked, right? So like, if you are missing the promotion item, right, that brings them up the tier, right, you're not held back, right, as a result. Okay, so let's talk about stats. So these are primary stats. These will probably change, right? These may be abstracted, right, into like strength, dexterity, that kind of thing. But let's see how far we can go with just these. So we have these resource stats. So level and experience, we're counting those sort of as a resource. Level is sort of self-explanatory, affects stat growth. It is also part of the efficacy of some skills, right? Like level is a multiplier in those formulas. And then experience rate, we're counting it as a rate, just so that like we don't really want the hard values of how much experience you need to gain to be exposed, so that I can do shenanigans in the background. Maybe this will change, but one of the reasons to have level and experience in this way is so that we are able to drain them. We are able to drain them and also be able to add like rate multipliers, right, to experience, and do all kinds of stuff there. But yeah, level drain is going to be a thing. It's going to come up in a couple areas later, right? Not in the demo that you'll be playing. Don't worry. But yeah, I think like when I run into that, it's a kind of temporary frustration that I think is very handy. Their recent game, Crescent Tower, I think actually did a really good job with their level drain, right? Where you were impacted by it in an early floor of the dungeon, and then in a much later floor, right, there was a much bigger impact, right, that required you to sort of kit your party out to deal with it. So yeah, really good implementation, and that's another great game to check out. So we have health pool and energy pool. Those should be self-explanatory, and then those have rates which sort of recharge them. So if you remember, we don't want to be regenning health in this game, or at least as much as possible, because we kind of want to increase the feeling of risk every battle that you kind of go through. And so we have a shield rate that'll put a amount of shield over your health, right? And that's the sort of buffer of acceptable damage before the damage becomes kind of permanent, and eventually you have to be like, oh, okay, we need to set up camp, we need to use healing items, right? We need to we can't move on further without risking a KO, and we want KOs to be such that like, oh, like I have to backtrack to like a healing spot in order to remove this. We don't want it to be easily. We don't want you to easily recover from chaos, right? Here. So in terms of the rates, they are sort of gonna be capped at like 50% in terms of like the gain, right, that you can get just from your natural stats, and then the rest of it comes from your equipment. It's going to be the goal is for it to be very hard to get 100% in any of these, even at max level. You're having to specialize up to it, and maybe you get up to like 70-80%, right? And then that comes with trade-offs essentially. So the more important stats are these. Each one is a flat value and a rate value, and I'll sort of explain what's going on with that. Power should be self-explanatory. Goes into how much damage you're dealing. Increase power by a point. It's going to increase the damage done by attacks and skills by a certain multiplier. Critical rate, how much you are able to deal double damage, right? If you have multi-hit attacks, right, we roll critical on each one of them, right? And if you do roll a critical, it does hit. There's not going to be a case where you make a critical hit and you miss. I've found that to be a thing that like a lot of older DRPGs did, which I just think is a little bit unfair, right? How do you roll a critical hit and also it was evaded, right? That's a little bit silly. Guard, right? This is your damage mitigation, and curiously, evasion is under guard because, at least as far as I'm concerned, an evasion is a defense crit, the way that a critical is an offense, like critical. In that, like, the function of it is it deals zero damage. Now, usually, evasion is put under the speed, right, like kind of category, and I kind of wanted to make a distinction here. Maybe the name changes, maybe it changes to block rate instead of evasion rate, but that is something that I think we're handling a little bit differently. We'll see how intuitive it is for players. Okay, the interesting ones are speed. So speed boosts priority and action order. What does that mean? This is not an individualized turns system. We're not doing timeline stuff, right? Instead, you queue up all of your actions, and then based on their priority, we resolve them. So if you have high speed, that's essentially a bonus to the priority of skills and attacks that you use. Various skills and attacks will actually start with like negative priority, so like having that speed boost is going to be helpful to make sure that they happen sooner, right, when we go to resolve turns than later. And then the chance of multiple hits, that is, certain attacks and skills will have multiple hits as part of them. Let's say that there's a weapon that does 1 to 3 hits, right? High speed makes it such that you're closer to the upper bound of hits than the lower bound, like more often than not. With guard and speed, their chance components tied to the flat value. I'm gonna need to see how we're able to do that, because this is usually handled by like a luck stat, but I've always had an issue with like you being able to increment your luck stat. Maybe this is just like a designer bias, right? Like maybe I'll just like give up and like finally just have a luck stat there, but I want to see if I can incorporate them within the existing parameters before needing like a luck stat. That being said, there is a luck stat-ish, right, in this hit rate bonus. So this isn't your absolute hit rate. Your hit rate is determined by your weapon and your skill, right? They have like a sort of a flat hit rate, right? And then you roll to hit, and then the target rolls to evade, right? Based on that hit. But this hit rate value is a bonus that is added on top of the base amount to hit. So essentially, you have sort of more dexterous, like alacrity type characters represented by this, and you have status inflictors. So status inflictor may not have like a high power, but they may have a high hit rate, because their goal in the fight isn't to push damage; it's to make sure that the poison lands, or it's to make sure that the stun lands, right? That kind of thing. There was a decision point of whether status effects are built up like you see in like the Souls games, or whether it is percentage chance to inflict, because this is sort of in a very like tangential way, we're making a neo-wizardry game, right? The sort of new genre that's kind of popped up. I'm going to keep it such that it is percent to inflict, right? Which may be a little bit old school, but like I think we want to keep that that kind of variance, right? Rather than exposing all the information to the player at all times. Okay, let's talk elements. These are your damage types. So most attacks and skills will fall into one of these three categories. We have melee, which, as I previously gone over, you have a bonus when enemies aren't shielded, very slight bonus, but like the bonus is going to be noticeable later on in the game, like as you get, right? Because that 10% bonus is going to be helpful. And you risk counters, right, when you do this, right? So when you are in melee with an enemy that can be also in melee, they can hit you back, right? And that may not be nice. We have exotic abilities. This may be called special, right? This is like your magic spells, right? Your breath attacks, that kind of thing. They're good versus shields, right? So you actually want to throw these out when people are behind shields and then switch to melee, right? If you want to like optimize on damage. And they risk being absorbed, right? Either like nullified or you heal from them, right? That's sort of the risk that you're running. Whereas ranged weapons have no bonuses or risks, but they're limited by reloads and ammo, right? Reloads and ammo, that was implemented last week, right? So yeah, we'll be kind of using that kind of going forward. Basically, there's going to be a point where like you can't use your ranged weapon anymore because you're like out of ammo, so you have to default to one of these other means of attack. In terms of the actual damage types, we have kinetic damage types: base, slash, pierce, and crush. Base is sort of the untyped version of this. Your unarmed attack is going to be base instead of crush damage. There's going to be a couple weapons that like do base like kinetic damage, and then you have the energy variants like pyro, volt, acid, and warp. These largely need no explanation. These are better or worse against certain types of enemies. The only like weird thing we're trying to do is that ice attacks, which usually have like, they're called like nitro in like sci-fi RPGs, or pyro, they're actually going to be within pyro, right? They're sort of like an anti-pyro, right? So the sort of two archetypes of the damage that we're representing there. Maybe we end up calling it thermal, but if we call pyro thermal, then we'll have to call acid caustic, we'll have to call like volt galvanic, right? Either we're doing simple names for all of them, or we're doing fancy names for all of them, right? That's the sort of trade-off here. Now, I know that some pattern is going to point this out. Yes, I am aware that kinetic is a form of energy, right? So what we're looking at is like kinetic energy versus like electromagnetic, right? Like thing. We could call it matter types of damage if you guys care, but then like where do photons like appear on that? Anyway, we can be dumb about this. The goal here for the damage types is, here's different things to change up, right, in order to respond to your enemies. Speaking of which, as I mentioned earlier, enemies are of these three types. They're not, or sometimes a combination of the types. They're not explicitly always going to be these, right? Sometimes, right, you may run into an untyped enemy, right? And that's where just raw damage is kind of good against them, but they'll be pretty rare. Usually we want like a hook into, like, when you come up against a new enemy, you don't really know what it is, but you know, okay, it's organic. All right, I'm gonna start throwing fireballs at it, right? And for that should work. So generally, these are strong or weak to one form of the other. And the more your characters lean into like them, there are benefits and negatives, right? You essentially polarize yourself on the damage types as opposed to taking equal damage from them. So it's a bit of a trade-off that we're introducing here. Okay, so with that, finally we get to class design. You'll understand why I went over the stats, the damage types, right? The way that you build characters before that. So one of the things we want to try out with classes is we want to try out a rookie class. The idea is that this is a tier 0 class. It doesn't really have any skills, and we actually want the player to have a period of time where they are this class, so that they can learn about like items and gear and things like that before we add on the knowledge required for what classes we want them to have. I would also like to do a thing. I love it when games do like a little personality quiz and to give you a recommendation, right, on what to do. And so based on the characters' rolled stats and based on what gear you've given them, we'll give you a recommendation of they should be this class or this class or this class, but we won't lock you into it. You can pick any of the three. So the three tier 1 classes are Grunt, Sneak, and Psion. Grunt is your sort of warrior knight equivalent. They're big on party order. They care about ally and enemy actions because they have things that can add on to them and can react to them. So they can have follow-up attacks after an ally. They can have they can have interrupts when enemy does a particular thing, and they care about threat, right? Which is basically the aggro equivalent in this game. While all classes are affected by threat, Grunt gets the most tools to manipulate it around, right? And also gets benefits for being at high threat, especially. Each of the classes will have a field ability. I'll get into these when we go into the exact things, but the idea of the field abilities is that out on the field while you're exploring, you can trigger these, right? And these give you a benefit for a certain amount of steps. Note that I'm calling steps turns here because a step on the field is equivalent to a turn in battle. This is going to be important when we introduce the idea of enemies being able to jump in to a fight, like in FOE, right? That kind of thing. So each of them have a field ability, and if you have more of that class, you get more charges of that field ability. Right? So that encourages you to diversify your party, but also there's going to be dungeons where you're like, yeah, no, I want like 5 grunts because every step I take is through like an environmental hazard. So yeah, it's sort of ways to encourage, right, like certain types of play. None of these field abilities are explicitly required. They just help improve what you're already doing, right, in the dungeon. Okay, so we have Grunt, which is sort of the warrior knight type. We have Sneak, which is the rogue hunter type. They care about enemy types. They want to inflict negative effects. They're big on criticals, and they have the stealth mechanic. So if their stealth that has benefits, both offensive and defensive for them, and when they either deal or take damage, they come out of stealth. So they sometimes need to spend a turn in order to try to get back into stealth, right? Because otherwise they don't have very strong defensive options. And last but not least, we have the Psion. They care about elements. We went over the elements earlier. They care about granting positive effects, so like buffs to the party members. They have what I'm calling a biorhythm mechanic, where depending on the turn, and the turn in Explore and Combat is the same, depending on the turn, some of their abilities change. And so you want to engage people in fights on particular turns. The best way I can describe it before actually implementing it is Moon Phase from the Mega 10 series. So there were moves that care about what moon phase you're in. And the moon phase comes from like Ultima, right, where the different moon gates activated in particular like moon phases. In Mega 10, also I believe in Ultima, it cared about certain moon phases to be able to cast spells. Well, the Psion kind of cares about that, but like it's like a universal force kind of a thing. Yeah, like it's a little bit Star Wars, right? So yeah, they're tapping into this sort of otherworldly force, but they don't have full control over it. That's what we're trying to simulate here. They're very strong, but also very temperamental. And then these are the tier 1 classes. For the purposes of the demo, we only care about these, but let's sort of see how they would expand into the tier 2 and tier 3. To help things out, I'm going to bring over some friends from Mass Effect to explain like the class fantasy, right, for each of the tier 2s. So Grunt can become a Sentinel or a Trooper. Sentinel is more defense oriented. It's very hard to take them down, right? They are very good at damage mitigation, right, and keeping the fight going. Whereas a Trooper, right, is more offensively oriented, cares about multiple instances of attacks, cares about AoEs, right, that kind of thing. So for Sentinel, we have our dear friend Rex, right, who is as a Krogan Battlemaster is very hard to take out. And for Trooper, we have Zaid, right, who was, if I remember, pretty good like assault rifles and things in Mass Effect 2. For Sneak, we have Operative and Tech. Operative, right, takes advantage of the stealth mechanic. They have delayed attacks and things like that, right? Like, so where like they wait before like they sharpshoot and things like that. And so they are very good at honing in on the enemy types in particular. And then the Saboteur here is more about inflicting negative effects to rather than single targets, to multiple targets, so they can set up traps, right, in order to do that. And to sort of represent the class fantasy for Operative, I think Garrus is a pretty good representation. For later class, Legion is probably a better representation of them. But yeah, like Garrus with a sniper rifle is kind of a classic, right? So I think that works out really well there. And then for Saboteur, we have Tali, right? Tali doing sort of like her hacking like stuff, summoning her drone, right, in order to help her. That's kind of where that class fantasy goes. And then for Psion, we have Diviner, sort of represented by Samara, right, from Mass Effect 2 and 3, and Warlock, represented by Jack, also from Mass Effect 2 and 3. Sort of the two ways that this otherworldly force is going. So Diviner, right, they are much more sort of buff and shield gifting sort of oriented. Right, the Myra, the mechanic, they care much more about the even turns, whereas with Warlock, they're much more about the destructive nature of this otherworldly force. So they care a lot about the odd turns, and in particular, they don't care about their party members, right? So they don't care about themselves, they don't care about their party members. It's everything in order to throw damage out, right, at the enemy. And each of these will split off into two of their own. I'm not going to waste everybody's time by going over them, but you'll notice there's a sort of little subtitle to each. That refers to their gear pool. So up until tier 1, everybody can use everybody else's equipment. But once you start getting to tier 2 and tier 3, there's specialized equipment that only certain classes can equip. And in tier 3, the call is whether you are good with whether you want to specialize and just remain in your equipment pool, or you want to grow your equipment pool in order to pull in stuff that the other classes are able to tap in. So an example is the Rainmaker class, right, for that Trooper kind of goes out to. They're about sort of artillery, right, like fire and things like that, but they can pull in tech weapons such as the tech weapons include like nano-like swarms, so you can make a Rainmaker that is like dropping like clouds of nanites that are like eating the enemies. It's very scary, but that is, yeah, that's the kind of thing that late game you'll be able to do. Okay, so this is how the classes sort of grow. How are they individually? Let's get into that. So here's Grunt. Grunt, right? They get their field ability, which is the buffer, right, which is good against hazards and traps. And they also, at battle start, if you have that ability up, they grant basically a positive effect, which clears the next negative effect that would be applied to you. So it's sort of focused around survivability. Right off the bat, when you turn into a Grunt, you get their first two active abilities. One is Sonic Tackle. This moves you to the front no matter where you are or where you've been pushed to. You deal a bunch of damage to your foe. You have a chance of inflicting stun, but you take some damage back, right? So Sonic Tackle is really useful, but it is also at a cost, so you can't really spam it, right? But if you have shield, right, your first move in a fight would be to Sonic Tackle, right? Get out there to the front, disable a enemy that could be particularly problematic for this party to deal with, and you're out in front and you're ready to maybe do a defend right after in order to recover back your shield. Protect Ally. This doesn't really any introduction, other than the fact that we're doing something a little bit different, where like you mark an ally. This mark we'll talk about this, but basically this is a subtype of like buffs, right? Where you buffs and debuffs, where you're able to mark a target, and then the target has essentially, when you mark a target, you're waiting for certain things to happen to the target in order to trigger your ability. So here you actually defend for them, right? And this is your defend command. So if there's stuff that stacks on top of your defend command, they essentially get the benefit of that. It's not just you tanking damage for them, it's you taking the damage for them and using the opportunity to trigger some of your defense stuff. So if you remember, melee weapons, right, have this counter chance, right? And Grunt is really good at bumping that counter chance up to 100%. So if you, for example, protect an ally that you know is going to get targeted, you can guarantee a counter, and you can also deal extra damage on that counter. So you're focusing on defending your allies and dealing off-turn damage as opposed to on-turn damage. With this sort of like tanky variation on the Grunt. Couple levels later, you'll get access to a passive and an active. You get reprisal and covering fire. Reprisal, as I said, right, is something that stacks on top of your usual defend, right, and makes it really good. And then later classes will stack even more on top of that defend, right? So like defend becomes a kind of really valuable action, right? That's on your command bar. Recovering fire. This is a way to generate threat. You hit all the enemies in a row, right? Generate a bunch of threat, right? And you are now the focus of their attacks. This threat stacks on top of like where you are in your formation as well. So you can be in the back line, or you can be in the middle line and do covering fire, right? And you can sort of spare your front line a little bit, right? Where the enemies will focus on your middle line now as opposed to your front. Or you can be at the back line and do covering fire if you just need damage, but you don't want the threat out of it. Because if you remember, in the very back line, right, you don't generate threat, right? Until the formation kind of falls apart. And then near the end of your tenure as a Grunt, you get this passive Stonewall, which wants you to keep your threat at a high level because you get a chance to have the damage. Now, all of these actives and passives have sort of 3 levels to them, and Stonewall is really good because at its first level it halves damage, at its second level it quarters the damage, and at its last level it just negates the damage entirely, right? And so, yeah, you can get a lot of survivability out of this, and you can be a high threat figure that is able to take on a ton of hits from the enemy because of the fact that you are able to negate some of the enemy's attacks, which is really cool. And then last but not least, you have Rebound, which is sort of the opposite of Sonic Tackle, where you move all the way to the back, you clear all your threat, right, and you gain shield, right, for each stage of threat cleared. So this could create sort of an archetype where you are getting the enemy to focus on you, right? They may focus on you for a turn, and then you head back, right? Recover your shields, right? And then you get back out there. So the Grunt is running back and forth, right? With these skills, right? As a part of what they do, right? So they care about the front and the back. Later classes will care about like whether you're in the front, back, or middle. But there's no restrictions on like your skills, right? Your skills can be executed from anywhere. You just need them off cooldown, and you need enough energy. I don't have the energy cost for the skills yet. I'll figure that out soon enough. Okay, next up we have the Sneak. So for their field ability, they get a cloak, and they essentially get to give stealth to the whole party, right? So the way that this works is that you avoid your random encounters, but the FOE encounters can still happen. But the FOEs do not detect you coming. So you can get a jump on the FOEs this way and get like a free turn on them. If you need, if you're having a particularly hard time with an FOE, you just kind of want to cheese them, right? This is a way to do it. My philosophy on cheese is that like if it's in a single player game, it's there for you to use, and I want you to be having like fun and engaging time with it. So yeah, there's no right way to play the game, hopefully, right? Like if one person finds that like, hey, this is more effective for their party, that's good. But if they find that, yeah, no, just like running up to the FOEs, right, and challenging them is better, then I think that's completely valid as well, right? This may benefit like a party that is like 5 sneaks, right? So they are able to like jump them and then hopefully deal enough damage because they're probably not surviving like the turn after the enemy fires back at them. So Sneak cares about inflicting negative status effects, which Early Bird does. Early Bird goes first in priority. So whenever this happens, this essentially puts your skill above in the priority order. And if multiple skills say go first in priority, then it breaks down based on speed. So if you have a weapon that deals a negative effect, like let's say poison, right, or let's say stun, right, that's going to be attempted to inflict it by this. But if you don't have anything, it'll try to inflict blind, and blind synergizes with what Sneak is trying to do, right? Because Sneak doesn't want to take damage, right? They want to be able to avoid damage at all chances. They get slip away, right, which they lower threat by 2 stages. The reason it says mark self is that the higher levels of it allow you to put slip away on allies, right, and eventually like a row, right, and so this can be really good, right, in order to, let's say there's an ally that generated too much threat, you can be like, calm down, right, and then you can have it focus there. The big benefit is that if your threat is the lowest in your squad, right, you gain stealth, right, which is ideal, because let's say you're in stealth, you deal some damage, you sort of guarantee a crit, you need to get back into stealth, you do it through slip away. Okay, we talked about enemy types being important. Well, here's a new kind of passive. So this passive, when you get it, you pick organic, synthetics, or etherics. You essentially get a bonus hit against them if you use your regular attack command. And then there's 2 levels to it, which allows you to stack more hits right on top of it. The way that this would work is that, let's say a weapon does 1 to 3 hits. If you stack plus 1 hit on it, it would be 2 to 4 hits, right? And so, yeah, this can get really powerful because you're getting more instances of damage, right, on a thing that you're kind of good against. Now, how does this work with respecking? Well, when you respec your character, you can pick this again, and you can pick it for a different one. And we do want that to be available because, let's say players are going up against a boss that's an etheric, they've spec'd a sneak to go against synthetics, right? Like, oh man, I'm not really able to optimize my damage the way I want to. Respec, you're good against etherics now, right? And you're able to take down the boss. There is a different philosophy where like you roll 3 separate sneaks, one of which is good at one of which is good at the other, and one of which is good at the last one. I just think that like players make an attachment with sort of the immediate party that they build, right? And so if you're making multiple sneaks, I want it to be such that it's because they class differently in the higher tiers, and not that they are different like skill point wise, right? All that much. I don't know. We'll see how that pans out. I've yet to implement something like this, right? Paint targets, that's pretty simple. But it's honestly more helpful for your allies than yourself, because it'll be sort of 2 turns before you're able to like paint the targets, to put a lock on them, and then follow up with a big attack. Your allies are able to do it within the same turn, right? And you are able to leverage a high speed in order to paint the target so that the grunt can come in with like a grenade launcher and guarantee land like an explosion on them. This might be limited in some way, but also just remember that when I say inflict like 1 lock-on, it's a chance to inflict 1 stack of lock-on right onto them. So you may mark in like a full row, but like let's say 1 out of 3 of them gets locked on. That's still pretty good, right, for what you're spending for the skill. Momentum. So previously, I think back in the parameters, we had a thing where certain things on the trigger will give you certain benefits, and this is an example of it. So here, based on whether you KO or critical an enemy, you recover 5% of your energy plus your recharge percentage. So if your recharge percentage is particularly high, then KOing and criticaling enemies is a great way to just make sure that you end up resource positive at the end of that exchange. Moreover, doing this often reduces skill cooldowns, and so you are able to use this to sort of chain abilities, right, by getting successive criticals. So momentum, pretty important skill, especially if you're going in for that sort of like assassin kind of archetype with the sneak. Last and definitely not least is Lethal Strike. This is sort of the linchpin right off the sneak kit. You deal 150 damage and it never misses, so like you are like guaranteed to hit. Maybe there's anti-synergy with paint targets, but honestly Lethal Strike I just kind of wanted to be a big thing that works, and it would be really good if you're stealth, right, before going to Lethal Strike, because if you're stealth you can bypass shields, which is massive, right? Because like early enemies may just have HP, but later enemies will have shields, will be able to regenerate those shields, and Lethal Strike is just like, I don't want to deal with that, right? And just defeats them behind the shield. Note how they sort of combo into each other. So let's say that you have a priority target against organics. You are stealthed, right, from the start of the battle, and you perform a lethal strike on them. So you're dealing 150 damage times 2 because it's a critical. So you're dealing 300 damage, and it cannot miss, right? And it bypasses shields. So you probably defeated that target, right? Well, the momentum is going to make sure that you gain back some of the energy that you spent in that whole exchange, and a random skill is reduced by 1. Well, if lethal strike is the only skill that you use, right, then that is the one that the cooldown goes down by 1. And so yeah, like they sort of chain into each other, right? Hopefully in a pretty satisfying way. Last but not least, we have the Psion. So the Psion probably requires the longest explanation. I do apologize. I know we're getting pretty long on the video. So the Psion's field ability. So you saw in the previous video that we have this auto mapping radius. Well, they expanded greatly, and we wanted it such that the regular auto mapping radius, when you come across a point of interest, it just records that as a question mark until you're like right up next to it. Well, Sense like allows you to actually know what that is. So if it's a trap, if it's interactable to open a door, if it's a chest, right, you are able to tell that just using your sort of otherworldly sense. And at the battle start, it gives a pretty useful buff. It gives you this regen for your shield and your energy recharge. It kind of bumps those up a little bit. Now, how extrasensory perception and regen like come together, I don't know. I'll try to figure out like a better thematic encapsulation for those. But let's get into their kit. So right off the bat, they get Element Bolt. This element is going to change and bless, right? And so both of these show sort of the way that the biorhythm mechanic kind of works, where based on which turn it is, right, that changes what the element is, and it cycles, right? So you can consider this sort of like a modulo or like a divisible by, right? Like that amount. Note, this includes out of battle like turns as you're stepping. So Psion is unique in that they actually want to go into certain fights on a specific turn, right? So that their opening move can be off the element that they really want. Now they get a level of control over this. Whatever their weapon element is, right, is what is on like turn 1, right? So they could have, let's say, 2 turns of pyro, right, like one after the other, if they were to set it up that way. But yeah, and also there's ways to retain the element so that it doesn't keep cycling out. So in the case of Element Bolt, let's say that you did an Acid Bolt and the target is weak to acid, well, you're going to retain acid, right, like as your thing, even though the turns kind of continue. So for the other abilities it'll change, but for Element Bolt it'll retain that as long as you're able to keep exploiting that element, right? So yeah, this puts you in the sort of zone to exploit elements, right? And then when the enemy is gone, right, the cycle begins sort of again. Bless is that, but it grants shield, which is pretty helpful because we haven't really seen any healing in any of these kits, right? Well, Bless is sort of the next best thing, because it's going to give you a shield and it's going to give you a bit of a buff. And based on which turn you are on the cycle, it's going to give you a different buff, but you really want to have it on turn 4 because you get to buff everything up. It's only for one ally, but it's very useful, right, if you're able to do that. And so maybe the way that you use the skill is that on turn 2 you use Bless, and then you're able to ensure that you get Bless back by turn 4. Okay, later on down the line, you are able to access motes and wards. Wards work very similarly to the bolt. Depending on the turn, your element changes, but you can give this to allies, and allies can sort of hold on to it, right? So let's say you gave an ally a pyro ward, right? And the enemy is like breathing fire at you. Well, it's going to nullify the next instance of pyro. The best way to think about this is how Yuna's barriers worked in FF10. It's the same, right? And like they can stack on top of each other. Now the neat thing is that the next attack will deal damage with that element. So does ward go into bolt? And the answer is yes. you can cast Ward on yourself on turn 2 and get a Pyro Ward. Next turn, it's going to be a Volt Bolt, which is very silly. Maybe I'll change the name. You get a Volt Bolt, but you have a Pyro Ward on top of you. So how does that work? Is it going to be a Pyro Bolt? No, it's actually going to be a bolt of 2 elements. And this leans into sort of this rainbow mage, right? The sort of diviner path kind of leans into, where you're not just trying to get the element of your weakness, you're trying to hit with all the elements that you really need, right? And so you can like test the waters that way by having like a 4 elemental bolt, right? And then you have to see what the enemy is weak to and then exploit it in future turns. So yeah, that's how Ward works. What's a moat? So a full cycle is a set of 4 turns, right? In the battle. Even if you have like gotten abilities that are like frozen on a particular turn, right? The cycle will kind of continue as we're counting it up. And you're able to gain moats. Moats are consumables that only the Psion that's generating them can use. And it basically allows them to recover energy, which is good, because the Psions are going to be using their skills a lot more than they're going to be using their regular attacks and defense. And you get to set the element of your choice for the next 4 turns. So this allows you to, if you've been dealing with the chaos, this allows you to control it, right, in future turns. And so you can be like, okay, I have a moat ready, and the rest of the party is ready to go into sort of a damage phase. So now I can eat the moat, make sure that I'm in Volt, right, and we are able to shock this enemy and shock this boss, right, for the next 4 turns guaranteed, right? So it requires a little bit of planning, but this is a way for you to override the chaos, right, of the elements, right, for a short amount of time. But it's still going to be like hopefully pretty useful. Okay, and then last but not least, you get Chain Hex. This again synergizes with you hitting weaknesses. So you've been hitting single targets with the bolt, but with Chain Hex, if you hit their weakness, it chains, right? It hits a random foe for 50%, and it can keep chaining. So additional levels of Chain Hex allows for multiple chains, right? And so early on, you're able to use this with things like Bolt. You're also able to use Chain Hex on your regular attacks. So if you have a weapon that deals an element damage and you exploit a weakness, you are able to chain that weakness, right? That way. So it gives Psion sort of a unique way of doing sort of AoE damage in this way. Okay, last but not least, there's sort of capstone ability. Void Nova is something that deals that shouldn't say weapon, but X% of warp damage. So this is that like last element type, which Psion largely only gets access to. The other classes may get access to it in their tier 2 and tier 3, but Psion for tiers 1 through 3 gets pretty ready access to warp. And also warp weapons with warp are really rare, right? So this is why you want to have that class, because they have the energy element that supersedes everything, right? It's good against everything. It doesn't trigger weaknesses, maybe that's the downside, but generally things with warp deal the most damage. Okay, so yeah, this is an attack that's going to be split evenly amongst all foes. So if you have just the one foe there, you get to hammer them, but if there's multiple foes there, you are able to deal sort of a wide area AoE. And this is the first ability that hits all foes, which is the big reason to have Psion in your party, is that if you're going up against swarms or if you're going up against large groups of enemies, Psions are probably the best to deal with it. Grunts are the second best to deal with crowds, and Sneaks are the worst at dealing with crowds by far, right? They really have like a single target focus that can only be broken in like the later class tiers. Okay, so yeah, so now the element can be changed by moats, and we actually changed the name. So if you eat a moat for Pyro, right, it turns into a Pyro Nova, or if you eat a moat for Acid, it turns into an Acid Nova. And that's good because now your attack, which previously couldn't exploit weaknesses, is able to do so. But you lose the sort of like overarching amount of damage that like Warp can do. And so Void Nova, sort of similar to Bless, really wants to be fired on the 4th turn of a cycle. And so yeah, the amount of damage it can deal builds up, and you really want it to be, or you really want it to be there. Because yeah, this is a big amount of damage they can throw, right? It's going to cost a lot of energy, probably, right? It has a high cooldown. It might actually have a 4-turn cooldown, right? If it comes down to it. But yeah, this is your big AoE that you get kind of early on, and yeah, you can key it to different elements based on kind of what you want to do. Okay, so yeah, that's the classes. Hope you enjoyed that. It's a lot, and for the tutorial, we only have to care about the first 3. But hopefully I can build this out and we can get into the later classes. But for now, let's care about these. Let's make them feel good, right? Let's make them interesting to build, and then yeah, we'll get into things from there. So that was the first design overview. Hopefully I didn't take way too long, but maybe there's good stuff to crunch to sort of think on. Please feel free to let me know, like timestamp like different places, and you can clue me into like maybe where you've seen another game do a thing right or wrong. I'm all ears. I'm very open to feedback. You kind of have to be. But yeah, next week we're gonna be back to working in the game itself. So thank you for bearing with me on this journey of theory, and yeah, hopefully we get to see all of this in action. Take care, everyone. Bye.